Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are entering the combat zone where the enemy has only one of four things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, run away, and we surrender. Aye. I've got too many windows open on my computer in front of me. What is it? It's not. It's bail out. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender.
And we surrender.
You know what's really got us going here is I have to, you can't, we're not on Facebook Live, so nobody can see me doing my bowing down before Nick, but I don't know if you caught a couple of episodes ago, Nick was talking about, some strange things going on upriver from Ottawa, along the Ottawa River, and we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, yeah, sorry if there was a small technical glitch beforehand. I forgot to push a couple of buttons here, and then we had some dead air. But we're on live now. And what are our housekeeping things, Nick? The first thing is, we'll get to that.
Okay.
First thing is, if you want to talk to us live, you could do that anywhere in North America, toll free.
They can do that?
844-415-2115. That's the number to call. The number again, 844-415-2115. And of course, I don't even know why I keep saying that, because I say it and then I repeat it as if people can't read it on their computer screens. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, don't forget to join us in our comment section or our chat room. But remember, there's only so many of these, it doesn't refresh live. So what ends up happening is, if you want to refresh your page, there's a little link on the bottom that says refresh comments. Click on that from time to time and you'll get your, comment section refreshed. I sound a little flustered tonight. I don't mean to. Spring has finally sprung. I'm telling you, it's been nice out there today.
I think you're just in so much shock that I was actually right about something.
Okay. So listen, we've got in the studio tonight, our good friend, Chris Fraser, who is sitting in, and he's actually thinking about doing his own kind of podcast. So we said, hey, Chris, come on down and join us here in the combat zone. The only thing is, Chris, I got to say this, okay? Whatever you do not reveal the location of the bunker, okay?
Oh, yeah.
That's a top secret thing. Nick won't kill you. He'll drag you off to the farm and make you work at the wedding this weekend.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. And believe me, there's plenty to do. There's more. Just taking a knife and cutting through the estrogen is a full-time job. And if that's not enough.
I was going to say, if it wasn't for GPS, I'd never find the bunker anyway. So thank goodness for modern technology.
Yes, from that perspective, yes. And trust me, if that's not enough work, we can always put you to work cutting firewood.
I can do that.
You ever run a chainsaw before?
Not yet. I don't intend to.
Trust me, I can teach you.
Oh, no, you want to. Trust me. Yeah,
it's one of those manly arts that has to be developed at some point, running and operating safely. You note the word safely, because chainsaws don't bite clean, and they bite hard. So safety is huge.
Okay, you don't want to hurt those trees, though, with the chainsaw.
Oh, I don't care about the trees. I'm worried about my legs.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, this is not the farm show. It's not the outdoor show. It's none of those things. Fun. It's the combat zone, where we, the only time we argue is when we're talking about politics for some reason, and that's because there's left, there's right. But in this bunker on this show, we're right and we're righter.
Yeah, that's true. No matter which way you turn, it's always going to be a right turn. The question is how hard.
That's it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I used to think I was somewhere to the right of Attila the Hun
till he met me,
and then Nick and I got to know one another, and
this guy's
now I'm like I come across to some people as a raving lefty lunatic. So Nick, listen, I'm serious. So I've been to. Our show comes from the national capital of Canada, which is about 50 miles north of the small city of Ogdensburg, New York. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty close to the border. And as you know, ladies and gentlemen, we're really happy that we're that close to the border, because you've all heard that Canada is heating up at twice the speed as any other country in the world. So once things get too hot here, we're going to be packing up and heading down the road to Ogdensburg because it's obviously going to be cooler down there. At least that's the story.
Well, they put
that
the shiny bubble pack kind of stuff. It's like that tin foil with bubble pack in between it. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and you use it for light insulation jobs.
Right.
They're going to put that like a curtain along the 49th parallel, dip down towards Windsor, come back up along the Great Lakes, and all the way out to the coast, because Canada's got to warm up twice as fast as any place else, which means they have to have this physical barrier to keep all the heat in.
Okay, so if I drive to Ogdensburg from here, okay, between here and Kemptville, I will take Highway 19. I'm sorry, guys, we're getting a little local for you. But
It won't last.
You'll understand where I'm going with this. I'll explain it in a minute. So I take Highway 19, which is otherwise known as, Nick, River Road, right?
Yes.
Okay. So River Road follows the Rideau River from Ottawa, from the airport. Actually, you're following Riverside Drive.
Right.
But it follows the Rideau River all the way to Kemptville, and then you take the freeway from there. So the reason I'm saying this is because as I'm driving along the Rideau River a couple of times in the last few weeks, I'm noticing that there's actually no flooding on the Rideau River. The level's high, as it is every springtime.
That's right.
But there's no flooding.
That's also true.
Okay. And as I cross the St. Lawrence, I noticed that the level actually isn't even very high. It doesn't appear to be very elevated. Of course, the St. Lawrence is a big river, so it's hard. You got to have a lot of water, right?
Right.
Sure.
All right. So I'm asking myself, I know there's been flooding. We've talked about it, right? Flood again, right? Right?
Right.
So we know there's been flooding in eastern Ontario, but there's been very little flooding upriver from Ottawa, and when I say Ottawa, I don't just mean the built-up urban area. I mean, Constance Bay, those areas. Okay. So I'm wondering, where is this flooding? Okay, ready? Now, cue Nick.
Okay, 2 years ago, for those of you who didn't hear my diatribe on this a couple of weeks ago, here's the story. 2 years ago, during the flooding of 2017, my wife and I took a business trip, up to Sudbury. And we drove along the Ottawa River for as far as practical, up to about Mattawa. Anyway, I noticed once we got past Mattawa that instead of everything being underwater, all the lakes and the reservoirs were all almost dry. I mean, they had drawn the water down 5, 6, 7 feet. And it didn't occur to me when I drove up, but when I drove back, we were thinking about it, and I said, I know why they did that. There has to be room for the spring melt. And they have dumped their reservoirs, drawn them down over the summer or the winter, slowly under the ice pack, so that it doesn't cause any damage downstream. But when the spring floods came, there was room for it.
Right.
Now, to be fair, they didn't get the same kind of precipitation that we did, but they were ready for it. So in 2017, I said, okay, obviously there is some issues with this whole river, lower Ottawa Valley level dam control, okay? Because that's how they control the level of the river. You go up to Keon, you see the major hydroelectric dam across the river, and they can open and close the sluice gates, not just to make power, but to also help regulate the water flow. So there's always water in the river, even through the dry seasons.
Okay.
Okay. So how come they did that, but we didn't? Because it happened again this year. As Kelly Egan points out in his article, you drive north and it's the same story. The riverbeds are almost dry. The lakes are almost dry. There's no water. And yet here we are, Constance Bay's underwater. The Ottawa Bridge, I forget which one it is, the Champlain, I think.
Chaudière.
Chaudière, yeah.
You know, it's 2 or 3 feet from the bottoms of the span.
Yeah.
Now, that's historically that there's been times before when that's happened.
Right.
But they didn't have the flood control dams in place back in 1928. So, obviously, thank you, Kelly Egan, for writing this story, because it's vindication of what I've been saying for 2 years now, that there's obviously, this isn't climate change. None of that's, even if it was, it wouldn't do this. Even if I believed in climate change, which I think is the biggest hoax ever to come down the pike, when I say climate change, I mean man-made global warming, okay? Climate always changes.
So, but the context of this is that the city of Ottawa decided to declare a climate change emergency.
Right.
A climate change crisis. Of course, they were following the example of Kingston. And I don't know why Kingston was doing it, because Kingston wasn't being flooded by, the Lake Ontario was over its embankments or whatever. I don't know. And again, if people don't know Lake Ontario, I mean, there's a reason why we call these the inland seas. They're not really lakes.
Yeah.
They're freshwater seas.
Yes, they're not salty, but they're seas.
Okay, so Kingston, Ontario declares a climate change crisis municipally, and Ottawa follows suit. But since they declared that emergency in Ottawa, politicians and prognosticators, pundits, commentators, the climate change catastrophists, as I like to call them, have been out there in force claiming that the flooding that we're experiencing now is just one more indication of climate change. And it's turning out that it was, in fact, the flooding we've experienced, it appears, really was caused by human activity or human inactivity, but not because of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas emissions, so-called, but because of poor and inept water management upriver from the Ottawa River. And it's interesting because, the last time when we've had serious flooding around here, and we have flooding every year, right?
Every year.
Year.
To some degree.
To some degree, yeah.
Well, I was a kid growing up in Ottawa South, near the Rideau River, and I actually went down there 3 or 4 days ago just to check out what the flooding was going to look like, similar to when I was a kid. And I was surprised when I went down there and there was no flooding. And I thought, well, how come the Rideau River down in Ottawa South isn't the houses? Because when I was a kid, it was just like every spring we'd go down there and ride our bikes through the streets, and we thought it was a big joke as a kid because it's like, it's not your house, someone else's. But I was surprised I didn't see the houses down in Ottawa South on Belmont, Fentimore Avenue, streets that I grew up near. There's no flooding.
Well, let me add one more anecdotal story to this, and it is anecdotal. I had a friend of mine. We were talking about it back in Killaloe, and he was telling me that his father was telling him that back in the 30s and 40s there was one particular winter, and he couldn't remember exactly which one, but it rained the whole month of January, and then it froze, and you could skate over the fields and step over the fences with your skates on. Wow. That's how much water there was. Imagine what that spring runoff looked like. Right. There's a picture that used to be in Dell's Diner down in downtown Killaloe, which isn't hard to find. The diner or
Killaloe's
downtown.
got a downtown.
Well, in town. Let's rephrase that to in town, because Killaloe's only got 700 people in it when both dogs are home. Anyway, on the wall of the diner is a picture of the Brennan's Creek flowing past the hardware store, and it looks like Niagara Falls. I've lived there for 20 years and never seen water anywhere near that. So I don't know where it came from, because there's been a dam slightly upstream. If you remember in 2017, the Little Red Dam had water pouring right through the windows. Do you remember that and being a big story at the time? The reason for that was nobody was living in the place to control the output of the dam. So the dam just overflowed, had no place to go, and it went right through the house. We didn't have that this year.
And there's been no story that I've read. I haven't checked out the Gatineau River, but I haven't read any stories of flooding on the Gatineau River, houses being flooded out in Gatineau.
Yeah, I haven't either. No.
So there it is. As I say, another climate change myth biting the dust. But what do these guys expect? What do politicians in Ottawa, and I'm talking about municipal politicians, right, what exactly do they expect by declaring a climate change emergency? I don't understand what that means in terms of policy. Does that mean like the city of Ottawa is no longer going to send out construction crews to fill potholes because they're burning gasoline to drive? Not that they're out.
Well, what's the asphalt made of?
Potholes anyway.
What's the asphalt made of?
Okay, good point.
And you're going to tell me, speaking of climate emergencies, I wish we'd have thought of this for the dumbest politician segment we sometimes run. The leader of the federal NDP, the highly respected, well-known, and admired in many circles.
Hold that thought, Nick. Hold on. I mean, we can do this.
Okay,
go ahead. We have the technology. Hang on. Okay.
Here it comes.
Stupid people.
Doing really stupid things. Yep, he qualifies.
Okay, now you can take it away, Nick.
So you know how well respected Jagmeet Singh is?
Jagmeet Singh.
Jagmeet Singh.
Yes.
Isn't that what I said?
Jagmeet Singh.
You were having trouble pronouncing his name.
Am I surprised? I have trouble with my own name. Anyway.
That's true, by the way. There were no racial guys before you start sending emails in. There were no.
That was no racial slur.
That is
slander.
absolutely true. I'm telling you, Nick has trouble with his name.
With my own name.
Well, his last name, Vandergraat.
You know, it's funny because I got a friend of mine who has two first names for a first and last name, and it drives me crazy. But I can't. I have a real problem, and I won't mention it. I won't mention who he is. I don't want him to have drive-by shootings or anything.
Right.
And he safely is absconded up in the valley, so you'd have a real hard time finding him. Anyway. But he is a business proprietor and does a beautiful job at what he does. Anyway,
okay, Jagmeet Singh.
Jagmeet Singh comes along, and he declares for the whole world to hear, because every microphone is hot and the internet is global, that Canada can no longer afford to use any fossil fuels at all.
Oh, here we go again.
Now,
really?
Somebody pointed out.
Did he bike to work this morning?
Well, first of all, if he goes to his constituency, he has to fly 7,000
Burnaby South.
Yeah,
2,000 miles
to visit his. He covers about.
Well, he's got to fly 2,000. He's 2,000 miles away from there.
Yeah, okay, but when he travels around his constituency, it's 7,000 air miles from place to place to place to place. When you try to cover the whole thing.
Oh no, he's in he's in an urban riding now.
Oh, I thought he was out in
Lower Mainland, BC.
Okay, so
he's in Surrey.
All right, but he still has to fly 2,500 miles one way just to get to his constituency.
Right.
Okay, so it's
and
January.
I'm willing to bet he's not riding his bike to meetings when he's there.
I don't.
Now think of this.
No,
it's January. It's minus 40, and he's got to go home to his constituency. Now, look, we all know that the winters in Vancouver are somewhat milder than they are in the rest of the country.
That's true.
But when he gets to Wawa, and it's minus 45, minus 50, I wonder how long it's going to take him to make the rest of the trip across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Did I miss anybody?
Well, don't forget
the rest of Northern Ontario.
Well, don't forget BC, because
BC's got to go through the mountains.
He's got to go all the way through BC.
That's right. He's got to go over the Rocky Mountains. Can you imagine him riding a bike that far?
Well, and what I want to know is, what is his carbon dioxide emission going to be during that trip?
As he's pedaling across, I can just imagine. If you put
that's the problem with this is there's an element, in all seriousness, we joke around about this, okay, but in all seriousness, there's a real anti-human sort of undertone to all of this.
Yep.
Because when you think about it, okay, we actually are, as individuals, as human beings, biological entities, we are the principal emitter of carbon dioxide, producer of carbon dioxide in our world. It's not driving cars. People drive cars, okay, but the reality is, and we're going to get to this in the war on meat. So you have this light bulb went off, and I go, oh, wait a minute, we're going to get to this, aren't we?
That's right, we are.
Right, I hadn't actually made that connection. Oh, boy. Okay, so, yeah, Jagmeet Singh.
He gets the dunce hat for... That's your cue.
I know what you're thinking, Nick.
Politicians make these statements because they know that if you're pro-environment and you sound like the environmental savior, that people are going to think that you care about the planet more than anybody else. Like they know that this sells. I don't know why it sells, to who they're selling to.
Are you accusing them of being green virtue signalers?
Exactly. That's it. I mean, a climate emergency. I mean, we have a real emergency with the flooding. That's an emergency. But you either deal with something or you don't deal with it. Giving it a term as emergency doesn't make the problem go away.
Well, the other side of this coin is how long is an emergency? Like World War II was a global emergency. Mm-hmm. It only lasted, well, it depends on where you draw the start line, but for all intents and purposes, it only lasted 5 years, maybe 6.
Right.
And then it was over. So when is this emergency supposed to come to an end?
Well, they call it an emergency, but this is just that people don't use language properly anymore. So I think that's part of the problem. But Chris, I mean, you're raising an important point. And that is, you're asking rhetorically, I think, but you're asking the question, you don't know why. Why do people, why does everybody, why does this sell? I don't think it sells. I think it's just that there's a complete and utter absence of people telling the other side of the story amongst politicians. So, okay, so sitting around here in the studio, we're talking about this, okay, and there are other people that are, charging at this windmill, beating the drum, trying to break through all of the noise. But the people that have the microphones, the people who own the microphones, and the people who own the microphones go to for commentary, are all singing from the same song sheet, even though a lot of them don't actually believe that what they're saying is true, but they think it's what the public wants to hear. So it's kind of like a loop. There's a feedback element to it. The politicians say what they think the public want to hear, and the public buys what the politicians are saying because they're not hearing anything different.
Right.
And I think that's a significant part of the problem myself.
Well, I mean, I work in a very large office complex. I was surprised to find out years ago, because I take the bus, so I have a very low carbon footprint. But I think I heard somewhere that about 70% of the people that work in that complex actually bring their cars to work, even though the majority of the people in my office complex who take their cars to work don't really have to, because there are very few places in the metropolitan Ottawa area where you can't get to your work by taking a bus. I mean, OC Transpo doesn't go every single corner, but it's pretty expansive. So if you really want to take the bus to work...
Did you say expensive?
Expansive and expensive. Yeah.
Expansively expensive.
If you want to get to work by public transit, you can. I'm sure that half the people I see on the Queensway, if I happen to be on the Queensway rush hour after work, I know that most of those people could get home to Canada or Orleans faster by taking the bus if they wanted to, but they take their cars. So, but how many of those people in their cars are like, well, we're environmentalists? Like, well, no, you're not. You're sitting on the Queensway in traffic when you could be on a bus.
Well, the reason I take the bus traditionally one day a year. Anyone want to guess what day that is?
July 1st.
You got it. Do you want to know why?
Because there's nowhere to park downtown.
No, because it's free.
Free.
I'm paying for it enough. I don't want to have to pay a fare too when I get on.
Yeah, Nick, it is not free.
No, but
They're
you're
just
right.
not charging the passengers.
This
a fare
is the
that
ultimate.
day.
This is like our medical system, right? It's a rolling medical system on steroids because, okay, I'm not dropping a toonie or a loony into the change box. I don't think they even take them anymore, do they? Now it's all Metro Pass or
you can still pay with your exact change.
Can you? Okay,
I think so.
Because I know you used to just drop a handful of quarters in and away you go, right? Although in those days a quarter actually meant something. Anyway, but the reason that I don't do it is because, first of all, if I got to get to work, let's say I'm working in the office by 9 o'clock in the morning, in January and February and March, it doesn't even start to get light until 8.
Right.
And the wind's howling at 40 miles an hour, and it's minus 25, and the wind's whipping around my ankles. I'm sorry. I am not interested in waiting on somebody else when I've got a perfectly good car in the yard that I hit the remote start button, walk outside in 10 minutes, and it's nice and warm. And if I have to run some errands after work, I can do it, and I don't have to wait on anybody else. The car is a symbol of the ultimate expression of personal freedom.
Right.
And when they try to cram us all on buses, now, I'm not going to say every municipal planner thinks this way, but there seems to be a tendency to try to take that freedom away. And I am not interested in playing that game.
Yeah. I'm just saying that people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Everyone says, I'm an environmentalist, but they drive everywhere. It's like, fine, if you want to drive, I have a car. I love to drive my car, but I'm not going to preach to anybody about being kind to the environment if I'm not walking the walk.
Right. Well, it's like, and even if they think that they're doing the right thing, like buying solar heating panels, okay, they don't realize that in fact, or even, you know, I'm gonna buy an electric car. I'm gonna get it subsidized by taxpayers. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back, but in fact, my carbon footprint, if that indeed is a problem, is much larger by for virtue of the fact that I'm driving an electric car, because you have a larger carbon footprint in the production of the parts of that vehicle. So, you know, you're right.
Wow.
But I think it's there's a lot of ignorance in this, and I think that's a big part of the problem as well, is that people generally, you know, when you're, you know, in so many areas of life, you know when you're being fed something, okay? You know when someone's yanking your chain.
Yeah.
But with this stuff, we're so inconversant when it comes to fundamental things about science and scientific method, etc., that all we have to hear is somebody say it's scientific, and all of a sudden, you know, we bow down to that authority and we don't question, and we don't even realize that someone's yanking our chain. And in many cases, I have to say, probably the person who's yanking our chain doesn't even know that they're yanking our chain themselves.
Their chains are being yanked too. Now, there's a little saying I like that describes people like me who will not play that game or buy into that logic, and that is, I know the difference between a rainstorm and somebody peeing on my boots telling me it's raining. You know, the sensation might be the same, but everything else is completely different. So don't sing me that song. Now, just one quick thing I want to do before we go to a break, because I know we're coming up against the clock. Justin Trudeau's government made an apology to Vice Admiral Norman today.
I knew they wanted to say this.
I'm sorry, I can't let it go.
Okay.
I'm just so thoroughly disgusted with this. No matter about the legality, they owed that man an apology. So rather than the prime minister stand in the House and issue the apology, he turned like a yellow-bellied coward and ran, and everybody else in his party issued the apology. That's not leadership. That's a tail wagging the dog. If it was sincere, he would have stood up on behalf of his party and the government of Canada and said, we sincerely apologize for what happened to Vice Admiral Norman, and we will make sure and do everything in our power to make sure it doesn't happen again. End of story. What's he do? The classless, the things I want to call him. The complete lack of class shown by him to run like a whipped puppy out of the House of Commons, because he would rather do that than admit his party dragged a guy through the mud unfairly for 2 years. That was disgusting, and it was disgraceful.
Okay, and with that, we have to go for a break. So we will be back in about 2.5 or maybe 3 minutes here in the Combat Zone on Think Radio Network. Stay tuned.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. He's Joe, I'm Nick, and joining us in the studio for about the next half hour or so is Chris Fraser. He's got his toe in the water to check it out and see just exactly what goes into a podcast like this, and he's thinking about joining the stable. So we let him into the barn, and I'm not sure if he likes the smell or not, but he's still here, so that's a good sign. I hope you're enjoying yourself, Chris.
Having a good time so far.
All right.
Yeah, I have to say this before we get on to the next topic, Nick.
Yep.
Okay, I want everybody to know that Nick rehearses his cliches. They're not spontaneous. They can't be spontaneous, Nick. Like you go with a checkout like at a cash register, okay? And somebody says, "How are you today?" And he's always got like something to say. You know?
You mean like a one-legged man in an Olympic swimming pool? I'm getting my exercise and making lots of waves, but I'm not getting anywhere.
See, that's just like I pride myself on being somewhat fast on my feet and perhaps a little bit witty. But we just don't come close to you, Nick.
Well, Joseph, keep this in mind. Even a blind hog finds an acorn once in a while.
A blind squirrel, you mean?
No, a hog.
A blind hog?
You're not from Arkansas, are you?
Yeah, clearly not.
Because down there, it's the hogs that find the acorns. Squirrels,
Okay.
they got the big gray squirrels down
All
there.
right, we've exhausted this topic, Nick.
Have we? Okay.
On to something a little bit more serious.
I was kind of enjoying myself. All right. Yes, by far more serious. I was reading for tonight's show, and I can't remember whether I found it or somebody sent it to me. So if somebody's listening and said, I sent it to you, I'm willing to admit that you did. And if I found it, I'll take the credit. How's that? Anyway, according to, let me pull it up. I have it here. Here it is.
Right. Well, this started because you came across this one story about
that's right.
UN peacekeepers
This was
in Haiti,
the first story
correct?
we found. And this is an AP story, and it's posted in the on a website called Collective Evolution, but it's also a story that appeared in the Telegraph out of Britain. And it was published first, I'm just scrolling up to the top here to get the date right, on April 13th, 2017. Now, look, I'm no rocket scientist, but even I know that's 2 years ago.
A little more than 2 years ago.
Just over 2 years ago. And the headline reads this way. United. Let me try that again.
It doesn't really read that way.
No, it doesn't. It actually
By the way,
sounds.
that's grammatically correct, you know.
United.
No. It reads this way because usually people go, "Oh, the headline says this," and they go, "Well, no, the headline actually doesn't say that.
Anything.
The headline reads that way."
That's right. When you read the headline,
I'm impressed, Nick.
Yeah, well, I don't impress people very often, so I'll take that.
Okay.
United Nations peacekeepers caught running a child sex ring. 2,000 plus cases of sexual abuse reported. Okay, well, first of all, if anybody's listened to this show, they know how passionately I hate the United Nations. This is just another reason why Canada should pack its bags, hang the Gone Fishing permanently sign on the door, and come home and leave that organization to rot right where it stands. Okay, so that was the first one. Then, Joseph, you found another one.
Well, more than that, I mean, once we started to peel back this onion skin, we came across in the space of about half an hour, probably 6 or 7 more stories, all different stories, different locations. But I want to, make it very clear that this was not, crazy bloggers making kind of allegations. So it was in the Telegraph.
Yep.
There was Chicago Tribune was one. The Daily Mail, Times of London.
This is all mainline stuff.
Yeah. So and all different stories about scandals in the United Nations amongst aid workers or peacekeepers, and in some cases, some very senior officials who had been arrested. There was one case of a fellow Dalglish Canadian aid worker, senior, running a program in Nepal, who was arrested. I don't know what the disposition of that case is, by the way. I didn't delve into it too deeply, but it was clear after some just digging around a little bit that obviously there's a problem at the United Nations. And it's not an isolated problem. It's pervasive. It's throughout the organization. It's there, again, aid workers across multiple agencies, peacekeepers from different countries and doing peacekeeping missions in different countries, and actual officials running and administering different programs and different agencies attached to the United Nations. So after spending a little bit of time with this, and we don't have to get into the sordid details. You can well imagine what we're talking about. We're talking about sex abuse. We're talking about human trafficking. We're talking about pedophilia. Okay, I mean it's really quite disturbing, quite disgusting. The kind of allegations that were being kicked around. So we leave that to the listener's imagination. But after doing that, we started saying, you know what we're not seeing here? We're not actually seeing what the United Nations reaction to this has been. And so we started digging around, and so far we have not been able to find anything other than a couple of reports that were issued by the Secretary General's office confirming that there had been allegations about this kind of thing going on, this kind of conduct, but no clear indication as to what action the United Nations has taken in order to root out this problem. So there it is. That's where we stand right now.
Well, in this story that I was referring to, and I won't go, you're right, there's no need to go into the sordid details. We all pretty much know what these topics entail. But there is a video clip of one of the guys involved at a high level in the here it is here in the UN, who is they gave his title. Let me mute the thing and I'll roll it back and I'll get his title. The UN's Tony Branbury. He is the He is, I forget what position he is, but he has to do with peacekeeping and aid and these kinds of things. So he's a vice, what's the head of the UN called?
I don't know. General Secretary?
Yes, Vice General Secretary to the UN for these kinds of issues. And he's reading this stuff and he breaks down and he cries. All right. Maybe the man is moved that much. But this was in 2017, and as Joseph just pointed out, there's no indication they have done anything about it. According to the story, I'm avoiding the gory details, they sent, of the 950 troops from Sri Lanka, they sent 108 home, and none were imprisoned.
Wow, incredible.
None. That's 10% of their peacekeeping force. Now, if this had happened to a Canadian peacekeeping force, it would have been crowed across the nation.
Well, recall the scandal involving the airborne regiment stationed in Somalia.
Rwanda, right.
Somalia was, right.
And that was a scandal, no doubt about it. But they'll deal with that, but they won't touch this. And this is part of the problem I have with the United Nations. Like, I'm serious when I say we have no business being involved with this bunch of. I'm trying to think of words I can use even on the internet. This organization is not worthy of the dust on our feet.
Yeah. But how many people are aware of a story like this? I'm sure if I go to work tomorrow and talk to some of my colleagues who I have coffee break with, they would have no idea that this is even a story. It doesn't seem to get the publicity that if it was like the Catholic Church, it would be like a big thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But United Nations, why do they that?
Well, get this. We went to in one of the stories we dug up, and I think it was the one you found, Joseph. It was called. There's a website called Hear Their Cries, which is an advocate for victims. Okay, and according to them, in 1995, there were 60,000 victims that suffered at the hands of the United Nations in 1995, and that's an estimate per decade. So since 1995, 60,000 a decade.
Now, it's important also, I think, to understand that we're not talking here about corruption. Corruption in the United Nations also is pervasive,
right? And
that's a totally separate subject. So, you've got the sex abuse. You've got you've got corruption, which brings me to what I think is the salient question here. Why, oh why, are we spending any time as Canadians lobbying for a seat on the National Security Council? What is the point to that? If you really believe in the United Nations, you really believe that the UN is a force for good, and you want to do something practical and useful in order to improve the United Nations, to improve the services that it provides to its clients around the world, then why would you want to waste your energy and your resources sitting, pompously on the Security Council, making great pronouncements and pontifications about, all of the hot spots in the world, when really what you could be doing is you could be leading the charge to reform this organization, if in fact it could be reformed. I think, from my point of view, I think it's beyond redemption myself. Okay, but if you really believe in the UN, and there are people that do, and clearly our government does, and it doesn't matter whether you're a liberal or conservative or whatever, okay, then focus on something that's useful, because other than this, it's just a bureaucracy. I mean, that is responsible for doing these kinds of terrible things.
Well, part of the problem for me, and because you're right, there's no arguing that. But I find pedophilia so disturbing that in most instances, like when I see it pop up on Facebook and things like that, I don't comment on it because I get so angry that I cannot control my temper. And only very rarely do I ever comment on, for that reason. It's the same thing with other moral issues and social issues as well. That there's sometimes the best thing I can do is keep my mouth shut, which is really unusual for me because keeping my mouth shut is not easy for me. So when I see this kind of thing come along and I think of how devastating it is, children are the essence of innocence and they will become jaded over time soon enough. Don't rob them of that few years, let's say between 5 and puberty, when they have this world vision that is anything is possible. Their imaginations are on fire and they just, this is the formative years where you begin to think about life beyond the farm gate. And one day you could be an astronaut. The next day you could be a knight in shining armor. The next day you might be a firefighter. Or the next day you might be a logger. Who knows, right? All those things are possible because we don't try to throttle their innocence. We know that the chances of them being a fighter pilot are pretty slim, especially in the Canadian Armed Forces. We know there's no such thing as knights in shining armor. Everybody's got dents and rust, But why ruin it for them?
Yeah. It's funny because I was going to say that about 2 nights ago I was watching, just kind of going by the CBC News. I like to take a look at what's happening on
You like
CBC.
to torture yourself, huh?
Yeah. And they brought up the residential school thing. I don't know why it was a story. It's been a story for the CBC. Always does a story.
They won't let it go.
At least about once a month. There's always they have to bring it into their newscast at some point. And we've heard about the horrors of the residential schools, but once again, they keep bringing this up at least monthly. But a story like this, to let it die, it'll die by tomorrow, according to the CBC.
Tell me, what other news organization besides this tiny little one here has even mentioned it today?
Right.
And there has been significant coverage of it, but not enough.
It's got no legs.
It doesn't trigger enough of a public outcry for people to care. There's just no pressure on the bureaucrats within this organization to do anything about it. And let's be fair. There are a lot of people. There are good people in the UN. You could say what you will about the effectiveness of the organization, but there are good people in the UN. Maybe even the majority of people at the UN are good people. And even if they're ineffective, they join the United Nations because they want to do good things.
Right.
Okay. So I take my hat off to these people. I think that their motives in many cases are quite clear, but there's no question here that there are rotten apples in the barrel, and we're not just talking about 1 or 2% rotten apples. We're talking about a significant percentage, whatever that works out to be. The problem here is that nobody cares, okay, except for maybe the odd journalist who will write a story about it and then move on to the next crisis, I guess. So everybody's concerned about global warming today or climate change. I guess, that's the flavor of the month.
Well, it's funny because, first of all, a story only gains legs if the media stays with it, even though there's no public interest. Take SNC as an example. When the Globe and Mail broke that story, all right, was it David Fife who broke it?
No, it was
Robert Fife.
Robert Fife. I knew I was the last name right. But the point is, he stayed on that story and he wouldn't let it go. And after a while, people began to say, so what is this all about? And began to get curious. So if you do a hit, excuse me, if you do a hit and run story, it lasts for a day and it's gone.
Right.
But if they come back with that, and then they come back with a follow-up story, like, the stories that we found, and every day for a week you published another story like this, you would generate the interest necessary to start the conversation of whether it's worthwhile belonging to this organization in the first place. And it would create its own energy. But because the news media is concentrating on if it bleeds, it leads, and the rest forget about, that there's no interest from the media's point of view of creating the interest within the public in order to give these stories legs, because to the media, oh, well, we like the UN, so we'll overlook that.
Yeah, they have their biases. There's no doubt that the media has their biases. I know when I was, I guess back in the days when I was in public school, high school, back in the 70s and, late 70s, early 80s, the UN was, a very respectable, at least considered a respectable organization. The last 20 years, wow. And I can't say, I don't know anyone who works at the UN. I can't say this as a person who's an expert, but something has changed over the last 25 years, and it's not the same organization it was when it started back in the mid-40s, I believe.
48.
And 48?
47. Because one of the first things it did was recognize the Jewish state, or set the groundwork for the Jewish state, which came into being in 1948. Anyway, having said that, and to Joseph's point, undoubtedly in an organization that size, there are going to be some very well-meaning altruistic people who are, if they're aware of this, are very ashamed of it, but for all sorts of reasons, don't want to rock the boat because that's where their economic bread is buttered.
Right.
Let's face it, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you.
Exactly.
And it's easy to sit here and rant and rage the way that I do because I have no financial vested interest in it, other than my tax dollars going to support it. But even with that said, sooner or later, things get so bad you have to take a stand. I watched one of the original movies about the evacuation of Dunkirk last night, shot in the 1950s. And I'm not going to, everybody knows the story, and if you don't, you can Google it and figure it out for yourself. I won't bore you with the details. But one of the main characters in the movie he was a subcontractor making lots of money from the crown, printing bottle tops or something like that. I forget what it was. Anyway, so he had a pretty good life. He had a nice boat. He had a wife and a new baby. But the war came along, and finally he could not avoid being swept up by it and having to make a conscious decision that was going to have dramatic impact on his personal fortune and his well-being, and very nearly cost him everything. But that's what you sometimes have to do. Sometimes principles matter more than a paycheck.
It's too bad more people didn't think that way, but it's a small minority that do think that way.
Well, it only takes a small minority to make a big difference. There's that old saying that only 1/3 of the Americans who fought the Revolutionary War, 1/3 of the American population supported the Revolutionary War, and it was even less than that actually fought it. So, and that's only one example. The Battle of Britain, you can run down the historical list. It's not always, millions of people in a tidal wave make a change. Sometimes it's just, what's that old saying, a rock in a stream. You change the angle a little bit. There's people who go out and make livings off changing the way a water course in a home, one of these little fountain trickly things, they'll move a rock and change the way it sounds. And that makes all the difference. Yeah.
You remind me of something. There's so many things fighting for our attention these days. And that's one of the problems, too, is that there are so many stories out there. And how do you get people to pay attention to a certain story? There is a young lady that she was a student just working not too far from me at work. And then I asked her, I said, what are you studying at school? And she told me political science. This is about 2 months ago we had this conversation. And I said to her, so what do you think about the SNC Lavalin situation? And she goes, what? She had no idea what I was talking about.
You're kidding.
And she goes, she's taking political science in university. And she had no idea.
Ask her what she thinks of Jordan Peterson. She'll give you all kinds of ideas.
Oh, she wouldn't know who he was either.
No?
I'm sure she wouldn't. But she did not know about the Lavalin. This was like about 2 or 3 weeks after the story broke.
Oh, my good Lord. Go ahead, Joseph.
It is true, and it's perhaps a sad commentary that, we only pay attention, most of us only pay attention to the things that either affect us or that we think are going to affect us. And I think, that's why people care so much about climate change, because they truly believe that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And if we don't deal with the problem, then, it's going to have a negative impact on us over the next the next decade or so, I guess.
And people delight in being afraid.
Well, that's the other thing, too, is that, I think there's a perverse kind of desire people are drawn. I think it's part of human nature that they're drawn to, the most catastrophic thing, right? But still, you would think that stories like this would get more attention about, the kind of abuse that's been going on at the United Nations. It's amongst its workers around the world.
Unfortunately,
it's quite pathetic.
There's so much child abuse around the world and sex slavery and whatnot that it almost doesn't faze us anymore because you hear about it so much.
You're taking the words right out of my mouth. As a matter of fact, I was going to give you the last word because we're coming up against the clock. But that's my attitude too. This problem has been with us for so long that people seem to be becoming jaded to it.
Yeah.
And when that happens, we're really in trouble.
We are, for sure.
Chris, it has been a pleasure having you with us. We're certainly glad you joined us.
Yeah.
And I hope it was not just a fog of chaos, because sometimes, anybody else would have called it the fog of war. Maybe that's what we should call it, the fog of war.
But you see, the problem is, Chris, when you're sitting here with us,
right?
You got to be combative. Like, you got to jump right in.
Well, I'm getting my feet wet, so it's one step at a time.
Don't scare him off. Jeez.
I'm not trying to scare him off. I mean, there's a reason why we called it the combat zone.
That's true.
When we were kicking around potential names for this, one of the names that we were considering was bulletproof, and then we realized, no, that just doesn't work because nobody comes in here as bulletproof. There's no bulletproof vests allowed, right?
No, none that I know of.
Well,
and we do a whole body scan when you come in if we don't know you.
You talk about jumping in. I'm a big hockey fan. I was supporting our Ottawa 67s.
What happened to them?
They were sailing along so well, and then you get this team like Guelph that kind of waits in the weeds, and they did it every series. They fall back 3-0, 3-1, and then they come back and they break your hearts. And you just tweak my thought process, because when you said about jumping in, sometimes you kind of wait back and you kind of sit back, and all of a sudden, boom!
Now we're going to get clobbered.
You're going to get clobbered.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the Maple Leafs; they just collapsed. Right?
They didn't collapse. Have you seen Boston play? They are on fire.
Sorry,
I'm picking them to win the Stanley Cup.
Sorry, well, I don't care whether they win the Stanley Cup or not.
In other words, nobody's going to beat them. The Leafs or anybody else.
Nick.
I'm tuning that out. Go away. Don't bug me.
With a capital C.
And how well did the Senators do this year?
I don't care.
Basement.
I'm completely... first of all, I'm not a Senators fan. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan.
That's just as good.
But you could say the same thing about the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah. Yes, I can, and I will.
But they didn't collapse. They
took Boston to 7 games. How is that a collapse?
And at the seventh game, third period, 7th game, boom. That's
then when I think
the
collapse,
tradition.
I think of who was it? The Tampa Bay spark plugs. Oh, no, because lightning's too strong a word.
But it's spring, so it's climate change that the leaves fall in the spring. That makes sense.
We're gonna.
You're funny.
Climate change.
Yeah, what we're gonna do?
Wait till next year.
We're gonna cut this segment out, and we're gonna send it over to Team 1200. Okay.
Yeah.
We want our own sports show.
That's right.
Okay. Come on, guys.
Oh my God. We'll talk about British carp
we should
fishing.
go down to we should go down to CFRA because they're doing repeats like right away at 6:00. It's the Bill Carroll's
the rewind,
rewind or whatever they call it, rehash or rewind.
If I thought
whatever.
we stood a chance,
can you imagine going at a prime time and of course they're going to listen to this. They're going to go now. They're going to listen to this. They're going to know there's no way we're giving those guys jobs. Yeah, after that. Well, we and Anthony's going, I'm with Joseph. Go Habs, go. Yeah, they went all right to the end of the regular season. They grabbed their golf bags before anybody else did. That's absolutely true.
All right.
But we could take it. We believe.
Well,
or we don't believe.
Remember the Leafs motto. Wait till next year.
Okay, we're going to have to go for a break now, guys. So great having you in the studio with us tonight, Chris, and looking forward to having you on board again in the near future.
You bet.
Okay, we are back here in the combat zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and we're going to change things up a little bit here. We have some interesting stuff to discuss.
In Canada's criminal justice system, there are two separate but equally important branches: the police and crown attorneys who investigate crimes and prosecute offenders, and the judges who let them off the hook. These are their stories.
And this one is a dark one. This is not. Oh, by the way, welcome back to the comment. Oh no, you just
I already did that, Nick.
Yeah, we're talking about the Terry Lynn Stafford story and McClintock. Is it Terry Ann?
Sorry, no, Nick, that's a terrible faux pas. It's Torri Stafford and Terry Lynn McClintock.
You're right, and that was unintentional.
Yeah, no, of course. And I don't mean anything by that.
I know. I'm
just
glad you pointed that out.
Yeah,
because I got a good memory, but it's painfully short. Anyway, the point is, the McClintock, the lawyers for McClintock, had filed papers complaining about the move from the Native Healing Lodge back to medium security when the family of Torri Stafford found out about it. And just went bananas that she would be treated that way.
Right. This was going back how many months now? It's several months ago.
You're pushing almost a year now.
Is it that long?
I'm thinking it is.
I don't know if it's quite that long, but anyway, so just to refresh people's memories, so Torri Stafford was a 8-year-old girl who was kidnapped coming home from school one afternoon by a guy,
a boyfriend-girlfriend team.
Boyfriend-girlfriend team. They took this young child to, I guess, a wooded area. She was raped, and then she was bludgeoned to death, if I'm not mistaken.
With a hammer.
And then they hid the body in some plastic bags and whatever, and that was the end of it. And so I don't recall the name of the boyfriend, but the girlfriend, who pled guilty, by the way, to first-degree murder, who perpetrated this crime with her boyfriend. Her name is Terry Lynn McClintock. And she has gone, or this only happened a few years ago, and then last year, and I don't recall, I guess it was last year, right? She was, it was revealed that she had been moved to a Native Healing Lodge, which was still for offenders. It was still a kind of a prison, but the idea being that, she was undergoing some sort of an Aboriginal healing procedure,
healing circle or whatever it is. Yeah.
And clearly, even though this was a prison, it was still, a significantly lower.
This is for pickpockets, and this is for small-time criminals. This is not for people who engage in these kinds of crimes.
Well, you would think. Anyway, I actually think that the whole Native healing thing in criminal justice is wrong, but that's a discussion to have at a different time. Anyway, there was quite an outcry, including here on our show. We spent quite a bit of time raising the issue and talking about it here. And so she was returned after the outcry, and questions were raised in the House of Commons over this, and so she was returned. She was withdrawn from that Healing Lodge program and returned to penitentiary, higher security. I don't know if she's in a maximum security pen right now or not. Anyway, so that's the end of the story. Until last week, it becomes known that she has hired lawyers to seek a review of the decision to have her returned to a regular prison. And not only that, but apparently she was also seeking some kind of compensation for the pain and suffering attached to that revolving door where she was transported there and then back again.
You know something, Joseph? The part that boggles my mind is, where does the idea come from that people like this deserve any compensation whatsoever? Do they not realize they were found guilty in the commission of one of the most horrific crimes one human being can perpetrate upon another? I mean, this is just so hard to wrap my head around. The idea that this woman, first of all, well, look, you can hire a lawyer for pretty much anything.
Sure.
I'm not blaming the lawyers. They're just doing the job they were hired to do. Now, in the lawyer's defense, they have said they've withdrawn this request for.
Yeah, but that's not the lawyer's defense. I mean, the fact is that she's probably just withdrawn the request altogether.
Well, okay, fine. But in other words, the lawyer's saying we're not pursuing it.
Right.
But the point is.
But I don't think they made that decision on their own. I think they had a client. The client was Terry Lynn McClintock. She had to make the decision not to pursue it.
Well.
So I'm not going to give, I'm not going to give, I don't mean to sound discreditable or to discredit the lawyers, but I'm not going to give them credit for the decision not to pursue this.
All right, fine. But I just can't understand. Like, what was in McClintock's head that thought she should do this in the first place? Look, I can't get my head around ever doing anything like this. But even if I did, I think there would be enough humanity left inside of me that I would say to myself, you know what? I'm just going to shut up and I'm going to, take what comes and maybe that's the problem. Maybe I just don't understand how these people think, because I can't imagine ever doing anything even remotely close to this. As I explained before about the innocence of children and what a disaster that is for children when you destroy it. So maybe that's part of the problem is I don't understand how they think. So for her to decide, I want this situation, examined whether it was legitimate or not. In other words, she wanted to go back. What she's really saying is, I want to go back to the healing lodge. That was because what's the logical conclusion to that mindset? I just don't understand it, and I cannot get my head around it. And no judge in the country should have looked at her and said, yeah, I think there's grounds for this.
Right. Well, topic for another conversation, but I actually believe that for some crimes, and these are my wife's words, but I agree with her on this, and she's written a number of columns on this in the past. When she was a columnist for the Ottawa Citizen and for Canadian Lawyer magazine.
Right.
Some people's crimes are so heinous that they deserve to die.
Yeah, it's capital punishment.
I'm not a blanket advocate for capital punishment, but I think that capital punishment ought to be one of the options that are available in the most heinous of crimes.
Well,
and so truthfully, I think that in a perfect world, in a better world than we live in right now, I think that Terry Lynn McClintock would have paid or would be waiting to pay for her crimes, as would her boyfriend with her life. I think that what she did and what he did to this innocent young girl deserve or warrant a death penalty. That's just my opinion. There's a great book, Nick. There's a great series of books actually written by a fellow by the name of, it's not his real name, it's his pen name, but I'll just give it to you anyway because that's what, if you look him up, that's what you'll find him under on Amazon. It's Theodore Dalrymple.
Dalrymple. I've heard that name
Theodore
before.
Dalrymple.
Yep.
And what he's done is he was actually a psychiatrist. He's a psychiatrist, and he worked for a number of years in the British prison system. And he's written some books about modern culture and crime and delinquent behavior, and they're very readable. And even though the subject matter is unfortunate and disturbing, he's a very good writer, very readable, and I would even say enjoyable. And he brings a certain cynicism, a certain sarcasm, a certain tongue-in-cheek attitude towards his writing and his observations. And I was reading one book a number of years ago, and something stuck with me about what he was talking about, how criminals tended, even in jail, to still not really take ownership over their crimes. And so he would give examples of how, for instance, this is the one that really stuck with me, that he would be talking to somebody who had stabbed the person to death, right? And when this person was describing the actual stabbing, the way that he would describe it is the knife went in, as if the knife had a mind of its own. So there's a certain amount maybe of human nature in when somebody commits a crime that's so heinous that maybe, you know, something clicks and they act and behave as if somehow, even though like intellectually they bear responsibility, emotionally they never really fully embrace that. If that's
so, it's some kind of internal defense mechanism.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it. You know, I've used a lot of words to get right to exactly what you said.
Well, but, you're much better at expanding on things than I am.
Another really interesting thing that he said was, what was it? A guy who killed his girlfriend, right? And so he said, doctor, I don't know. I can't now. I've lost the train of thought. It's the knife. I had to kill her. Otherwise, what would I have done? Okay. She was nagging me so much, doctor. I had to kill her. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done.
I guess the idea of just walking away never occurred to him.
I guess, who can explain human nature?
Yeah, I, said the little red hen. Yeah, it's, something, this whole capital punishment argument for a long time, and I've been, in principle at least, an advocate of it. And I remember Pope John Paul talking about it years ago, and he said, look, society has the theoretical right to put someone to death in defense of itself. It's not just about punishment, it's about security. And he said, but with modern prisons, that it's not necessary anymore. Now, and for a long time I carried that banner, and I still think there's great merit in that. However, I also agree with you and your wife that some crimes are so heinous and so evil is the only word. I want to use the word satanic. How else do you describe that kind of blind fury, against another human being, that they do warrant capital punishment? This isn't some guy who accidentally shoots somebody when they knock over a liquor store. This isn't about, a husband or a crime of passion where a husband walks in on his wife or a wife walks in on her husband and they catch them cheating, and somebody grabs a gun and somebody dies because in that moment of rage, they lose control. That's not the same thing. These kinds of things, there's never an excuse for. I don't care how angry you get. I don't care how, I can't imagine. Well, how could an 8-year-old make you that angry in the first place? They're only 8.
Well, I don't think that this was a question of being angry.
Well,
I think, they did what they did. They had absolute intent. They had full knowledge of what they were doing. They knew what they were doing was wrong. And once they had done the deed, they knew that the only way that they could hide their crime was to kill this young girl. I think it was calculated.
And you could very well be right.
And in a case like that, where it's premeditated.
Yeah.
It's calculated. It's planned out. It's heinous. There's no question here about guilt. I think that the appropriate punishment in a case like this is the death penalty. I really do.
And something? This is where I'm going to agree with you, because the more I think about this, you're right about the premeditation makes everything different. There's a difference between premeditated murder and a murder in the heat of passion. Okay, there is absolutely a difference, and that's why for a long time premeditated murder did carry the capital punishment as an option for a judge. In this case, not only is it premeditated, but it's against one of the most innocent in our societies. And the reason that I would say we need to grow a spine about this and not let the, how do I put it? There's a group of people who would resist this vehemently, bringing back the death penalty. They would call it all kinds of things. Cruel, inhumane. Yeah, well, what about the little girl who's in her grave, beaten to death with a hammer? What about how cruel that was? What about how inhumane that was? There's always this one sense. So Canadians, and people in general, not just Canadians, but people in general in Western society have to stand up and say, wait a minute, you cannot under any circumstances do this. And if you do, we will exact the ultimate penalty. Assuming now, I would have a caveat, and that is beyond a shadow of a doubt, not just reasonable.
Right.
You know, we have to set the bar high because we're actually taking another human life. So I don't mind a high bar for that. But anybody who clears that bar goes on to death row and we dispose of them. I'm not suggesting we do it in any torturous way, but they have to die.
Well, this is it. You forfeit your life.
That's right.
And again, I agree with you, Nick. I think the bar has to be set quite high. I think that there has to be not even reasonable doubt, not even no reasonable doubt, but absolute knowledge.
Yes.
Okay. They're caught. There's nothing circumstantial here. We know they did it. It's here's the rock solid proof. The circumstances in this case, I just think the circumstances in this case called for that. But getting back to the original thing,
yeah.
I mean, the original issue here was it's not even that she's wasn't subjected to the ultimate penalty, which we don't have. And by the way, Canadians need to understand. I don't think this is right either, Nick. Somebody who commits murder and gets sentenced to life in prison in Canada is only 25 years.
That's another thing that's got to change.
So it's not even a question of that they didn't get the death penalty, but at least they got life in prison. No, they don't get life in prison. And so you could get life in prison and be out and there are many cases of not even a life sentence that judges now sentence murderers to lighter sentences that are not 25 years.
Or if they do sentences 25 years with a chance of parole starting at 10 years or 7 years or whatever it is. And I'm not saying every parolee is approved for release, but a lot of them are. So they don't serve even a third of their sentence and they're back on the street. What kind of justice system do we have that allows that? No wonder. Something is, I'll bet you, and I have no statistical data to back this up, but part of the most frustrating thing about being a cop and what leads to, I would call, burnout within our police services is the idea that they arrest really, really, really bad people and they know they're going to see them back on the street again. No matter how hard they work to make sure they caught the right guy, have all the evidence, put forward a good case, get a conviction, and take drug dealers as an example, 2 years later, they're back on the street. That must just drive them around the bend. How do you do your job that way? I mean, it's like a farmer plowing a field, looking back over his shoulder, find the groundsman, flip back over again. He's got to do it again.
Well, it's a real problem, Nick. Recidivism is the word that they use. Recidivism.
That's right. And there are all kinds of people out there, especially among pedophiles, where the recidivism rate is so high that we can't, letting them out is just not an option. So unless we find a way to deal with the recidivism rate and find ways to mentally cure them of this mental disorder, then I'm sorry, they stay in jail. Make them criminal. What's that? What's the phrase they use? Something offender?
A dangerous offender.
Dangerous offenders for life.
Yeah, well, there is an ability to keep people in jail indefinitely, and the term I think they use in Canada is a dangerous offender. But it used to be that in England at least you're held at Her Majesty's discretion.
That's right.
So it's an indefinite jail sentence, and if when it comes time for you to be released, there's some kind of a process, and the question is asked, are you going to reoffend? So it is possible, but it's very rare that somebody gets to be declared a dangerous offender. And is that any surprise in an environment where a stone cold killer like Terry Lynn McClintock can be transferred to a healing lodge as if she's the person that needs healing, and then she's transferred back to a regular prison because there's such a public outcry. Okay, that's what it takes. It takes a public outcry to have her transferred back. She's transferred back, and then the courts actually take seriously her demand for compensation for her pain and suffering for having gone through this terribly traumatic experience. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that person in Nova Scotia.
Who, I know who you mean.
Who was demanding and getting treatment for PTSD
because he murdered.
And the PTSD was the result of him murdering somebody.
Yeah, he murdered a cop and put her body in a dumpster.
Right.
And he claimed PTSD.
Right.
Well, sorry, son, that's self-inflicted. We don't have any sympathy for you. Should have been the answer.
Well, can't suffering from PTSD be part of his sentence?
Would work for me.
Okay, now, we don't have the death penalty. You suffer from PTSD, good for you. Okay, you're in your jail cell alone, okay, with your demons.
According to Google U, otherwise known as Google University, the Correction Service of Canada says there are 458 dangerous offenders as of April 2011. So the stats are a little old, but only a small number of people are designated as such each year. The number, however, is climbing. In the 1980s, about 9 people per year was designated as dangerous. So while the number is climbing, that's a fraction of the total prison population in this country. And I have no doubt if you go through case files, you'll find all kinds of people like McClintock who should have been designated this, and who, whatever her slob for a boyfriend's name is, I forget now. Both of them should have been, if not the death penalty, then certainly this.
Well, but how is it possible that she would even be considered to be a dangerous offender and not released at a certain point in time if the system already deemed her eligible to be moved from a regular jail to a healing lodge? It's never going to happen, Nick.
I know.
She will never be tagged a dangerous offender and kept in jail.
Not now.
Okay. And even if the government tried to do that, and there was some sort of an adjudication around it, all she'd have to do is say, look, they were going to let me do this. They were going to let me do a healing lodge. And so I qualified for a lesser sentence and for therapy and healing, okay, because I'm the victim here. Clearly that's the case, okay. And they only moved me back to a regular jail because there was a public outcry. Well, since when does public opinion determine whether or not I should be declared a dangerous offender?
You know what? And in Canadian courtroom, that argument would win.
I think that she would win something like that.
Yeah, I'm finding it very hard to argue with that. So anyway,
this has been a depressing hour and a half. First
you know
we're
what?
talking
It
about
has been, but
climate change, and then we're talking about
But once in a while, you got to deal with this stuff. I mean, look, we hammer the climate change drum on a pretty regular basis, and we're going to get back to it here shortly, a little bit more lightly than what we've been doing. There was what have we there, because there's all kinds of depressing topics if you want to get into them, like the case against parental rights in Alberta. Now they have the same situation we have in Ontario, where if you try to interfere with your child transitioning from one gender to another, you can have your child taken away from you. That's on the books here in Ontario, and they've just put it on the books in Alberta. So it's a downward spiral for parental rights. We could talk about that. you name it. There's all kinds of things out there.
Well, that'll be a future topic, but not too distant future.
No, that's, something, if Rob Ford really, really wants to make a difference, take that off the books.
Okay, we're going to go for a break, Nick. It's coming up to the bottom of the hour, and I need to recharge my batteries after this discussion.
All right, we'll come back with something lighter right after this. We'll be right back with more on the Combat Show. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. I kind of flubbed the name at the bottom of the hour and it reminded me one of the names that we had considered for this show when we were first getting rolling was Two Angry White Guys.
Angry white man.
Angry white man, that was it.
Yeah, I'm not angry, Nick.
No, I'm not either. But just anytime somebody like you or I says anything, we're accused of being just old, angry white guys who just don't like the way we're not progressive and we want to go back 150 years and all the nonsense that we hear around it.
That's an interesting way of putting it. And let me just say that I don't believe first of all, I don't think that progress, at least the way it's defined, is always a good thing. Progress in and of itself is not necessarily good. It could be good, but remember, there is such a thing as progressive tooth decay.
That's right.
And progressive heart disease. So, progressive doesn't necessarily mean good. It just means moving forward. And in that context, okay, sure, I'm all for progress. But as a conservative, I don't believe in turning the clock back. I believe in choosing the right path moving forward. So you're always, every day there's a fork in the road, and you choose whether you're going to go to the left or to the right. And just conveniently, that happens to work out well when you're thinking politically as well. But I don't believe in turning the clock back. I believe that when you're moving forward, you're always making a decision. Are you going to go this direction or are you going to go that direction? And whatever direction you decide to go, there are going to be consequences.
Well, I think the other thing that I keep in mind is just because we can do something doesn't mean we should.
Correct.
I mean, yes, we have the technology to do a lot of things, but is everything we want to do going to turn out to be beneficial? It takes wisdom, which can only come from experience, salted with logic and research and knowledge to provide the best result. And those things don't always come in the same package. So you really have to think long and hard about whether or not what you are proposing and, whether that solar farm is a good idea or whether driving a Tesla is a good idea or, put in your ingredient du jour. And you have to ask yourself, what do I think the long-term unintended consequences will be of this, and can I live with them if it turns out to be that way?
Well, if you are buying a Tesla because you want to reduce your carbon footprint,
you're lying to yourself.
Then you don't know what you're doing, because that Tesla has a bigger carbon footprint than the normal car you're driving. Okay, it may use less fuel now, but the production has had a much larger carbon footprint.
Well, Germany just backed that up with a study. They looked at Teslas and compared them to the Mercedes diesel 220D, I think was the car model that they used, and found out that the diesel had a smaller footprint over its lifetime than the Tesla did, for all the reasons you just articulated. So that's just not speculation on your part.
No, well, and I don't speculate anyway, or I try not to too much. Right. But this is, here we veered back into the whole subject of climate change and man-made global warming and everything. And there's a reason for it, because what we want to talk about now, Nick, is the war on meat.
Yes, we do.
And this I take this very personally.
So do I.
Because I am a carnivore. I want everybody to understand that. I'm not angry. Okay. There's the name for another podcast right there.
The Angry
Carnivores.
I like that. That's good. Now, before we get into this, I do want to mention something that happened today. I think it's today. Published today. The Senate Transport Committee voted 6-5 to recommend that the full Senate not proceed with Bill C-48, the tanker ban. And that's fantastic news. It's not a complete rejection yet because the whole Senate has to vote, but it is a good step forward, and it's a slap in the face to the Liberal government because 99 times out of 100 they get a rubber stamp out of the Senate. And most of these guys are independents. Oh, yes, they do. Come on. When's the last time the Senate didn't rubber stamp something? They may send it back and say, revise this, but it always gets through.
Well, that's the, see, Nick has jumped in there like that because I was shaking my head.
Yes, here's
the thing about a funny thing happened on my way to the Senate.
I was just going to... Okay, well, tell us what happened on the way to the Senate.
No, it's just a figure of speech.
Okay, all right.
No, a funny thing happens when senators become senators. They actually become less partisan. And the Senate does some very good work, to be honest with you.
I'm not denying it does.
And so what they'll do is, there's a lot of rubber stamping that goes on in the Senate, but, a lot of that is because they are not elected, okay? They're appointed. That's a separate subject. I don't want to get into it now, okay? But so they don't generally try to block legislation from the elected House of Commons. But they do study legislation, and often they make good recommendations on amendments and stuff, and it goes back and forth. So I would say that, 99 times out of 100 isn't fair to the senators.
All right, 98.
Okay, well.
Anyway, I didn't want to get into that too deeply. I just thought to bring that to people's attention.
So now I'm dropping the subject.
Okay, so let's go back to this war on meat. First of all, the thing that got me thinking about this was I was listening to terrestrial radio today, and they mentioned that McDonald's has already done it, and Tim Hortons is going to do it. And I'm not knocking them for doing this, but because they're private companies and they can do whatever they want to serve their customer base. So it isn't a slap against those two corporations. Okay, but they're bringing out meatless or bacon substitutes for their breakfast sandwiches and things like that. And there's a whole culture built around this idea of consuming meat, that meat is bad, vegetables are good. And my answer to that is pass the barbecue sauce. But seriously, what you have is, the reality is, both in proportion are good for you. My wife is on what's called the keto diet, and she's lost almost 30 pounds, and she looks great. I mean, she's taken years off because she's actually paying real close attention to what she's eating, and she's seeing the results. And most of it is a fat-based, high-protein diet, much of that coming from meat. Meat is not bad for you. It is certainly a very good choice. And there's this attitude out there amongst a lot of different people. And by the way, if you want to be a vegan or a vegetarian, I got nothing against that. Knock yourself out. But the bottom line for me is, when it becomes a cultural thing, when people try to shut down different aspects of agriculture in favor over others, just because they don't like what choices I'm making, now we got a problem. And that's what I'm seeing that's going on. Now, there are some, in the case of, the CBC has a great story, and I think this is a great example of putting pork back on the menu. They're having wild pigs running rampant all over Canada as their range expands north. Down in Arkansas and different places like that, they hunt wild boar, and the meat is excellent. So they've learned to adapt to having wild pigs out in the bush and so on, and we have to do the same thing. So I'm not going to read the story to you, but basically they're finding them. Well, let me read you this one little paragraph. Wild pigs are now Canada's most prolific invasive mammal, according to what the University of Saskatchewan calls the first ever published survey of their distribution in Canada, and they're causing an ecological disaster. They'll root up vegetation like a rototiller. That's what pigs do, by the way. let's see, they're rolling around in the water and defecating in it. That's also what pigs do. They're just being pigs. So the best way to deal with it is hunt them. You won't wipe them out, but you will control the numbers. We do it with deer. We do it with all kinds of different animals. That's one way to deal with it. So there was that, put meat back on the menu to help solve the problem. But David Suzuki and his foundation make some of what I think are outrageous claims. And from his website, we have this. Livestock production accounts for 70% of all agricultural land use, occupies 30% of the planet's land surface, and is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gases such as methane and nitrous oxide. First of all, I don't believe those numbers. I think they're exaggerated. First, as far as the ratio is concerned between land, animals, and grain, like if you go to Saskatchewan, you've got nothing but miles and miles and millions of acres of wheat. And, not a cow to be seen. Alberta's a little different, but they have... Anyway, I'm getting off track. But the bottom line is there's something missing in this last line in that paragraph. Because he mentions the methane and nitrous oxide. Now, nitrous oxide is a product of combustion. Okay? And when you run your car... going down the road, that is an actual pollutant. That's real poison. Now, it comes out in very minuscule amounts. It's not like a 1960s Studebaker. But animals, to the best of my knowledge, don't produce much, if any, nitrous oxide. They produce a lot of methane because that's a product of fermentation that goes on within their innards that breaks their food down. But they don't actually produce nitrous oxide that I'm aware of. And I'm no veterinarian and that kind of thing. It's just based on my own experiences with animals. But the idea that growing animals for food is inefficient, this is the kind of stuff that drives me crazy.
Well, here's the thing. This is what bothers me so much about the portrayal of problems that we see, whether it's climate change, whether it's whatever it is. What's always missing is, okay, somebody takes a snapshot, and the snapshot creates a picture of a problem. And whether it's a problem or not for real, I don't know. Let's set that aside for a second. But now you have to have a solution to that problem. So let's think it through. Okay, let's assume that animals, that we breed animals for food.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem for the environment. It's a significant contributor to climate change. Which, by the way, this is the claim, okay? Let's not kid ourselves, guys, okay? That's the claim that's being made. The claim that's being made is that you meat eaters out there, by virtue of the fact that you eat meat, are contributing to climate change because the animals that are bred to feed you your meat are producing greenhouse gases. That's pretty much it, okay?
That's the underlying current of the story. Yes.
So So, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that that's true. What is the solution? Is the solution that we all stop eating meat? So let's all stop eating meat. Now what happens to those animals, Nick? Okay, we're no longer breeding them. But does that mean that those animals are no longer breeding? Of course it doesn't. So the animal population, by virtue of the fact that we are no longer eating animals, that animal population is going to increase. And it will have the opposite effect to what these guys are saying they want to see happen. I mean, this is not rocket science, unless you're arguing that, not you, Nick, but them, unless they are making the argument that we are going to stop breeding the animals and we are going to pointlessly kill these animals when the population gets to be at a certain point where we think that they're causing significant environmental damage. Now, Okay, newsflash, that will never happen in a million years. Because if you can't hunt foxes in England, okay,
don't be surprised when
then you're
overrun with
not going to be able to hunt wild cows, okay, when cows are no longer domesticated.
Well,
okay,
there's a great example of this kind of thinking in New Zealand. Sometime, I'll say between World War II and the 1960s. I cannot remember exactly the era. But they had a problem with this bird called an emu, which is native to New Zealand. And because either the main predators died off or the numbers just exploded. And so the New Zealand government decided they were going to launch a war against the emus. And it's famously called the Emu War. If I wanted to, I could probably Google it and pull it up. So they put a bunch of Browning machine guns on a bunch of jeeps, handed out ammunition, and the army was supposed to take these jeeps and run rampant through the flocks of emus, gunning them down just as fast as they could pull the trigger. Guess what the total was by the end of the campaign?
The total of emus killed?
Yep.
I don't know.
1. They ran it over with a jeep. The birds were so good at ducking and weaving and surviving and circling around and being hard to hit, they couldn't hit anything. And they accidentally ran one over.
You see, I hadn't heard this story.
I know. That's my son told it to me. And if there's anything that Jordan is, it's he gets his facts straight. So, and he laughs about it because unless the most prolific animal on the planet is the emu, because they actually waged war against it and lost. So I see no reason why other examples wouldn't happen. Like try to get rid of rats. Try to get rid of rabbits. Try to get rid of wild hogs. Okay, coyotes. We have all kinds of examples of when you put pressure on wild animal populations, that the numbers don't go down. They might take a short little dip, but the animals respond by having, especially coyotes, having a larger litter to make up for the other animals that are being killed.
Yeah, well, there is so much ignorance and lack of thinking. That's really what it comes down to. Is the quality of thinking that goes into this stuff is just it's abysmal, Nick. In Ontario, when they banned the spring bear hunt in Ontario, and now they have a bear population problem in northern Ontario, and of course they're not going to bring back the spring bear hunt in Ontario. Why? Because the guys who live in the city, which is the majority, would never stand for it because they think, oh, how can you kill those cute bears? So the point I'm making here is, okay, that if human beings stop eating animals, then the animal population will not, go down. It will go up. Okay, it's if you stop, the point is if you stop breeding, if you stop controlled breeding, okay, then you can't control the population of the animals. So what are you going to do? Are they actually suggesting that we all stop eating meat? Okay, well, what do we do with the breeding industry then? And with the animal agriculture? Well, let it go wild, okay? We were all great environmentalists, right? What they don't seem to understand that itself is a problem.
Okay.
And that's in fact, it's not just a problem. That in fact is the problem that they want to address by forcing us to stop eating meat.
Let me bring you up to speed on the Emu War. I just Googled it.
Okay.
Okay, because it's hilarious. This was after World War I, which is why I couldn't quite remember. But it happened in Australia, not New Zealand. Okay, so I'm just trying to get my facts straight here. They launched an attack against the emu using Lewis guns. Now, Lewis guns are a very iconic symbol out of World War I. They had the round magazine that was on top, and the barrel came through a large sleeve, and you could carry them around and shoot them from the hip, that kind of thing. And they went after these emus, and they actually did kill a couple. But here's just the Cole's notes from Wikipedia. It ran from 2 to 10 December 1932. The Champion District in Western Australia, also known as the Great Emu War. The participants were emus, Sir George Pierce, Major G.P.W. Meredith, the Royal Australian Artillery. Outcome, failure. They couldn't scratch the population. And looking at some of the pictures, the emus devastated the landscape. And imagine if you had goats get loose, sheep get loose. These are different kind of grazers than horse and cattle are. A goat will rip the roots right out of the ground. It's one of the reasons why you need a lot more territory to raise goats than you do if you're not going to feed them hay and that kind of thing. If you just let them graze, they need a lot more ground to cover because they will strip the ground right down to the dirt.
And goats will live wild.
And I got one. I know all about it. I came out one day and there's one on the cab of my truck. And he wasn't wild. He's ours. But
okay, but the point I'm making is that...
Yes.
You know, there's a fair question of whether or not cows will, which are very domesticated, will adapt to living wildly. I think that's a fair question.
Oh, I think they will.
I'm not an expert, but I think that there's a fair question.
I think they will.
But, I think they will also, but it's a fair question.
Yes.
But goats for sure will live wildly. Sheep will for sure live wildly. Pigs... 100% will live wildly.
Obviously.
And
they are a very hardy and smart animal.
You understand, okay, that when pigs start breeding in an uncontrolled way and you're not eating pork, okay, if you're banning pork and you're saying, let it go back to nature, that's a real problem.
Well, they're finding that out west. But the thing about these animals is that, for cattle, as an example, there have been cases in Renfrew County where some, because a lot of, I'm not saying they're irresponsible. I know a neighbor of mine who's got several hundred acres and he has pastures that are fenced in that might be 100 acres in size. Once in a while, they will break out of the pastures because maintaining a fence around 100 square acres is a full-time job. And sometimes they'll break it and you don't know about it until your neighbor calls, hey, your cattle are in my backyard. Okay, so if you gather them up, you can put them back and fix the fence. But every once in a while, one or two will slip through the mesh and end up running loose in the bush, and they go feral, they go wild. And the longer they're out there, the harder they are to get. And sooner or later, you have to bring a vet in to trank these things so that you can get close enough to them to bring them back and put them in. They will go feral or wild very quickly. And that's an animal we have domesticated for thousands of years. Imagine something like a pig. Now, they've been domesticated a long time, but they're a lot smarter than cattle are. So, yeah, this is a huge problem that people haven't thought through.
Well, just think, and you know, we don't have a rat problem here, okay? But if you want to put it into terms that people will understand, just think of the campaigns that you have in North American cities from time to time, to have cats and dogs neutered, spayed.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. How successful is that?
Okay, well, successful or not, the whole rationale behind it is that the cat population is getting too big and too out of control because they're not being carefully monitored by their owners. They get out and they breed.
And they go wild.
Okay, and they live wildly.
Yep.
And so the Humane Society goes, well, that's the humane thing to do. We will sterilize these animals. Well, again, the proposition that we are going to have a positive impact by stopping eating meat is at all levels absurd and an indication of people who just have not thought through what they're talking about.
And part of the reason for that is because far too many people in this country now live on the corner of Spruce and Juice. And they don't know, they've lost touch with their agrarian roots. They have a completely distorted sense of what animals are. They think they're pets, and in many cases they're children, because people don't have the kinds of children they used to. And they have a distorted view of, a healthy relationship between man and beast. And that plays into this as well as part of what I think drives this whole, let's get away from meat because I don't want to eat fluffy. Well, nobody's saying you have to eat fluffy, but don't tell me I can't eat Bessie, or I can't drink the milk from her udder, or that I can't make cheese, or that, and run down the list, that I have to eat this vegan or vegetarian diet just because you want to sleep good at night thinking you've done your bit to save the planet. The planet's not the problem. The planet is not in trouble. We are, because of thinking like this.
I'm suppressing a yawn, Nick.
I realized that as I was winding up.
I wasn't suppressing it very well.
Nobody heard it, but I saw it, but that's okay.
Well, that's okay.
I wasn't going to tell
you. It was a silent yawn.
Thank God.
But I noticed how you didn't fill the dead air there. You just let people.
I was in the midst of winding everything up, and then I thought, uh-oh.
Joseph doesn't have anything to say. Okay. And Nick hit my kill switch there when he started coughing.
Yeah, I was reaching for a kill switch. Any kill switch.
Any kill switch. Your cold sounds a lot better, though, I have to tell you, Nick.
Well, it's not really a cold.
It was a very long and lingering thing. A lot of people, I had it for weeks. It took before it really cleared up.
I have had this since I was 19.
Since you were 19 years old, so I got it from you.
Yeah, obviously. So did everybody else. No, every twice a year or so, I would get it for a couple of weeks. Now I find out there's a bit of a sinus postnasal drip that goes down my throat and makes me cough.
Right.
I can't feel it, but it trips the cough mechanism, and that's why I'm not sick. I just cough a lot, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, no, I get that at night sometimes. Listen, as we head here to the end of the show, congratulations to Nick, whose daughter is getting married this weekend.
I cannot wait for Monday.
Right? This Saturday?
Yes.
At an undisclosed location so that none of you guys out there in
Killaloo
are going to crash the party.
We won't tell you which Catholic church it's in Killaloo.
Right. That he's not telling you where the reception is.
Yeah, I won't mention that's at the Paul Yakubowski Center in Barry's Bay. That's our secret.
Okay. Anyway, seriously, Nick, congratulations to you and your wife and the whole family, and many happy returns.
Well, I thank you very much for that, and I make jokes like I can't wait till it's over Monday, but it's always a great time. Then we've got family from all over the country who will be here, both of them, and it's going to be. I'll tell you what, Friday night's going to be the big party. That's after the practice party, and that's when we get the bonfire going and the guitars out, and we howl at the moon all night.
Yeah.
As long as we don't need a snowmobile suit to do it.
Well, Nick, my wife is going away for the weekend, so I'm looking for a place to hang out.
Bring a tent, buddy, because there's not many tent. There's not much bed space left.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it for us this week. We'll catch you next week.
You bet.